Welcome everyone to our first official spring semester Fulton Colloquium. We are recording the session just to make you aware, and the recording will be available on our Fulton YouTube channel, and I'll share that link with you in the chat. I am Chris Egan, the Associate Dean of the Fulton School, and it's my privilege to get to moderate this session. We would ask you to stay on mute for now. We'll have plenty of time later to have some discussion and question and answer in the session. And for now, if you just relax and keep your video, if possible, from being too distracting, that would be fantastic. I will, in just a moment, turn it over to our dean, and then we'll introduce our two award-winning speakers who have about 20 to 30-minute presentations for you. And between each, we'll do a brief Q&A and then a longer kind of open engagement at the end. And so Martin Pereboom, Dean of the Fulton School, will set our context for today, in which we will meet two of our Fulton Award-winning faculty members. So thank you all so much.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I'll be super quick. Thank you for joining us today. The Fulton Colloquium, we hope, is a good opportunity for faculty and students to get together and really celebrate what we do. We think of that most often in a scholarly context, people coming back from sabbatical, reporting on their adventures. Today we're focused on teaching, and we wanted to highlight in particular the efforts of Drs. Rachel Steele and Andrew Sharma. And so I'm going to pretty much just turn it over back to you, Chris, to introduce them and get started. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you. So our first speaker is Dr. Rachel Steele. She's an assistant professor of psychology. She joined SU in 2017 and teaches courses on social, personality, and political psychology, attitudes and persuasion, prejudice, and research methods. She discusses instances of racism in society and on campus in her classroom to help students identify the psychological underpinning of these issues. Dr. Steele earned her PhD in social psychology, and she was a member of the Psychology of Peace and Violence program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Her scholarship examines psychological factors that contribute to prejudice, as well as outcomes for individuals and society. Her research uses both quantitative and qualitative methods and responds to current and ongoing events. Congratulations on your 2020 Fulton Teaching Award. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I was nominated for this award by Dr. Michelle Schleihofer, who was the former chair of the psychology department. She was the chair at the time of the nomination. And I wanted to thank her for her thoughtful and detailed nomination, which she kindly sent to me afterwards, and for the Fulton School for granting me this honor. And I wanted to thank Dean Pereboom and Dr. Chris Egan for the invitation to speak as a part of the Fulton Faculty Colloquium. And thank you for the warm welcome. So my nomination listed a number of things, including the breadth of the courses that I taught in the last academic year, my willingness to talk about uncomfortable issues like racism in my classes, and my Psychology of Prejudice course that I taught this past fall for the Clark Honors College, and modifications that I've made to my course content and to my curriculum to try to better represent the students in my classroom, and perhaps more importantly, the people that our students are going to interact with when they leave SU. So I want to focus my talk on sort of this latter portion. And psychology is probably similar to other fields in that at its inception, it was dominated largely by white men. So I'm going to ask for audience participation. So do people have thoughts or ideas about why this might be the case? At the inception of a field of study, why were there a lot of white men? Yes, Dr. Patterson.
Well, women didn't work outside of the home for the most part, and certainly didn't have the education, like a PhD, to conduct research and to build theory.
Okay, so access to education, societal norms. What other things might have influenced? If we look at the history of our field, we see a lot of white men. Yes, Doctor.
The nature of the academy itself, sort of the maybe the clubby nature of it, and where the academy would have been very restricted in terms of who could actually earn a degree there, let alone teach there. And even elite institutions would, for example, restrict, would have quotas on Jewish faculty members, and would be completely closed off to, say, African American faculty members. So the nature of the academy itself and its exclusivity.
Okay, which obviously some of those things have changed today. But if we look at, say colonization, the slave trade, racial segregation, if we're specifically talking about the United States, although the US shouldn't be and is not the center of academic thought. But many of those things made the attainment of higher education nearly impossible for people of color, especially Black people, for centuries. And social and cultural norms prevented many women from attaining positions as professors, researchers, and theorists. And even now in the field of psychology, when we sort of look at the few women who were sort of around in the early days, many of them were actually family members or spouses of famous psychologists. And the only reason they got to do the work that they did and that they're known is by the white male family member that they had. So there's obviously a lot more diversity today, but we know that we still have a long way to go. As in many segments of our society, the privilege that has been granted to white men gave them advantages in their scholarly success and in their recognition, and that hasn't been leveled out yet today. So a few years ago, Dr. Bemis, who is also on this call, one of my colleagues in the psychology department, along with a number of other faculty members in the psychology department, and I could list them all, and I'm guessing I would miss someone who was part of the process of planning all of the events to bring the I Am Psyched exhibit, which was an APA, American Psychological Association, so our primary disciplines professional association, to bring that exhibit to SU in the spring of 2018. So I am just ever so briefly going to show you the I Am Psyched website. So it has sort of interactive information on the website. It also has this lovely map where you can see all the different locations that the exhibit has traveled to. You can read more information about it if that is of interest. So Dr. Sherry Miles Cohen, who is the Senior Director of the Women's Program Office at APA, a Black woman and psychologist, was running a workshop with girls from underrepresented backgrounds. And the idea of showcasing women of color in the field of psychology was born. And Dr. Miles Cohen actually came and gave the opening address as a part of the I Am Psyched event. So not only, oh, thank you. Rye mentioned all the other people who were involved. Thank you. So as part of the agreement to host this traveling exhibit, we had to agree to have multiple events, to have programming that went along with it. So we had events over the course of about 10 days with academic speakers, with women of color who work in the field of psychology in our local area, with women of color alumni from our department who came back, and they all shared challenges and also victories with our students. So the I Am Psyched program is obviously pretty awesome, but the fact that it exists, the fact that there is a need for a program which brings attention to the important contributions of women of color in psychology is a clear sign that they're not already receiving the recognition that they deserve. So another example comes from APA's Division 45, the Society for the Psychological Study of Culture, Ethnicity, and Race, and the APA's Office of Ethnic and Minority Affairs. So they came together and they created a tribute to contributions that people of color have made in the area of health and health research, particularly health issues that disproportionately impact people of color. And I'll just again share my screen so you can see this website. So on this page, they have these tabs, and they featured 90 psychologists who are Black, Asian, Latinx, or Indigenous. And so each page, you can scroll down, it's interactive, you can click and look who all these people are and read about their contributions. I happened to find this page when I was trying to look for more diverse sources to include in my courses. And so I found this a really, really helpful resource. But I was sort of struck by the number of people that I actually recognized. So I was a psychology major as an undergrad. I went to a psychology PhD program. I should know who these people are, right? I knew 5 out of 90. And maybe that's just me, but I have a feeling also these are all people who do research related to health, which is not my specialty. But I think what that demonstrates is that I'm a product of my field, and my field doesn't consider all scientific contributions equally. So next, I want to talk about students. Most of us likely know that there are racial disparities in higher education, particularly higher education outcomes. So just one example is Black and Latinx students have lower retention rates than white and Asian students. So on a positive note, data on undergraduate trends in the United States and actually at SU have shown that the percentage of students of color gravitating toward our discipline is actually growing, but it's still not representative of the racial breakdowns in society. And unfortunately, students of color, especially Black students, are less likely to go on to graduate school and especially less likely to go on to PhD programs. And we all know PhDs are the ones who go on to create knowledge, who are the ones who are contributing to our field and our understanding of human psychology. So as a university, as the Fulton School, as a department, are we setting these students up for success in our fields? The current data suggests that we're not. So to ponder this question, I decided I would look at some data because that's something I like to do. So I looked at some data on curriculum, and I picked on Psych 101 mainly because I found data, I found sources about this. So sometimes it's called general psych, sometimes it's called intro to psych. At SU, it's the one course that we teach that is part of the Gen Ed program. So for many students, it might be the only psychology class they ever take in their undergraduate careers, unless they end up, becoming a psychology major or minor. So a team of researchers collected data from 20 intro to psych textbooks, and these were kind of a breadth of current textbooks, very popular, very commonly used ones, and psychology, for those of you who aren't psychology faculty and students, is a field based on science and empiricism. So a vast majority of the theorizing and the writing, except for in the early years, comes in the form of academic journal articles. So a textbook is actually a very appropriate and efficient way to summarize a lot of data. So textbooks are, I guarantee, the most commonly of written curriculum used in psychology classes. So I'm going to, again, share my screen and click to this slide just for a few moments. So this team examined which individual articles were most cited in these 20 sources, which books were most cited, and which theorists were most cited. And does anybody have any guesses about what they found, trends or ideas from this data? Oh. So someone wrote, all white old men. Pretty close. So as far as I could tell, this wasn't the goal of the research. So the goal of the paper was actually to show that who is given the most page space are not actually the people who have the ideas that are the most important or even the most scientific. So it's probably no surprise to anyone that Sigmund Freud was the person who took up the most space page-wise. And most psychologists today would consider his ideas and his work completely unscientific. But I actually went through, looked up all of these authors, the ones that I didn't know, to try to figure out, what's the racial and gender breakdown here. Spoiler alert, all of them were white, unless you count being Jewish, and unless you count the one who was a second generation immigrant from Spain. And my guess is that at their time, those people probably did face discrimination. But there was no racial diversity among these highly cited scholars. Highly cited, that doesn't mean that these were the only people in these textbooks. I did find a handful of women, not a lot, but a handful. A few of them that I knew and some that I didn't know. So intro psych is not a course that I teach. Oh, thank you. Meredith named another one that I didn't recognize. So as an attitudes researcher, I can already start to think about the counter arguments people will have to this example. So I'll just share some of those with you. One, I highly suspect, is that these people who were cited in this paper are not the only scholars that are in these 20 textbooks, which is totally true. But I'm willing to bet that if I tracked down these textbooks, any selection of psychology textbooks, likely from any topic, and did an analysis of who the people were based on race and gender, we would see a pretty low rate of racial diversity. And as I said, this wasn't actually the purpose of the article. The purpose of the article was simply talking about how, they were trying to see who's the most cited, who was the cited across the majority of these commonly used sources. They weren't looking at race or gender. Another counter argument I can anticipate is that, these were textbooks from Intro to Psych. Intro to Psych kind of gives an overview of the whole field. There's a lot of history. So of course, there's a lot of older stuff that's cited. And so of course, there are a lot of, old white dudes among those people. But I still believe the fact that this might be considered a given, that we celebrate people who became famous essentially by luck of the race and gender they were born with, who were advantaged because other people were disadvantaged. I find that problematic. So enough about a class that I don't teach, because that seems like it's maybe not so fair. But I'll talk about a class that I do teach. So this last spring, I taught psychology of personality. And I assigned a textbook, and like many, it is organized in chronological order, and it's organized by theorists and school of thought about personality. So on the first day in class, I held up the textbook and I shared this slide with my students. I shared this slide with my students and I said, okay, so do you notice anything about all these people who are featured in our book? And the first comment I got was, well, most of the photos look like they're pretty old. And I said, okay, so what else do you notice? And I paused and I waited because I can stand there for an uncomfortably long time. And of course, eventually students get more uncomfortable than me. And they're like, well, most of them, all of them are white and they're all men. Well, except for one. So eventually they get around to my point. And I said that we had a conversation about what we were going to cover in terms of our learning and our understanding of personality. And I said that some experiences and perspectives are not going to be represented in this book. And in fact, some might actually be misrepresented. So then I showed them this slide and I said, that's why in this class, we are going to do readings by other people to give you perspectives that you're not going to hear about in this textbook. And just to give you a couple examples of some of those. One reading was about the MMPI, which is a widely used, highly respected personality inventory. But what the textbook didn't say, and the other reading that I assigned did, is that this inventory was normed with white participants, all white participants. And the research article that I had them read was research with Native people, Indigenous people in the United States, and their assessment of the MMPI, and basically how it pathologizes their experience of discrimination, meaning that the standardized measure of personality would classify them as emotionally unstable because of the stress they experience because of racism. So that's a problem because this is a personality inventory that we all think is very, very respectable and that we cite. And if we saw research that used it, we would be like, yep, that's all good. I believe that. But it clearly does not apply the same way. The meaning of the questions is not the same for all people. So as the course went on, I discussed readings that talked about racial socialization and how there are differences between white families and Black families. And how Black families have to, for example, prepare their kids for the experience of racism, where white families most oftentimes at best avoid talking about race. They think that that'll be better, that it causes problems. And they just sort of intuitively assume, their children are going to learn how to be not racist by avoiding the topic. And so, oops. Oh, is everybody still there? Sorry, I just bumped something on my screen there. So I shared readings about how some of Maslow's ideas, so a lot of people, if you're not a psychology person, have probably heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that some of those ideas he actually borrowed from philosophy of the Blackfoot Nation, who he spent some time visiting. And he did so without attributing any of those ideas to them. So again, it's not something you're going to read about in a textbook. But when you look at the models side by side, you look at Maslow's model that I'm sure a lot of people have seen, the little pyramid with all the little levels, and you look at the Blackfoot Nation model, the similarities are numerous and unmistakable. So, except, unlike Maslow, the place where they put self-actualization, which is this sense of seeking meaning in life, wasn't at the top of the pyramid that maybe if you're really lucky you achieve that. It was the base of the pyramid. It was the foundation of everything else we do as humans, which to me says a lot. So, you might be thinking, okay, there have got to be other areas of psychology that are that do a better job, right? And there are some. Community psychology is one, clinical counseling is another. Neither of these are my specific areas of specialty, but they definitely do a better job of addressing issues such as racism and inequality. But the problem is scholars who study those things actually face more obstacles to getting their research done and to getting their research published. Many of those people have identities that are marginalized to themselves, whether it's race, gender, sexual orientation. And so the work that they do is harder, it takes them more time, and it's less likely to get published. So we're less likely to see it in textbooks. So examining dynamic issues with our students involves a significant amount of effort and research on our part as educators to think about what we are presenting to them in terms of research and writings that address important topics such as race and culture and gender and sexual orientation. And there's actually a growing movement in a pocket of academia to decolonize our areas of study. So I've heard this from psychology, but I've heard it from other fields as well. And the idea behind this is that the truth we have been told by our discipline is only the truth of some people. It is not comprehensive. It does not include, and it does not cover everybody and all issues. So research and teaching obviously go hand in hand, because the things that get researched and published are eventually the things that get taught to our students. The people who carry out research, the people who are presented in the curriculum that we have our students read, are the role models that they look up to. And we want to be able to show students of color, particularly Black students, that they belong in our field. So we can't do that by simply talking about racism in one lecture in an entire semester. Our students are way, way smarter than that. So many people have been focusing on this idea of decentering whiteness in curriculum for years. So I should give a shout out to my colleague, Dr. Sharice Chappelle, who actually developed a course on multicultural issues in the psychology department years ago, because she knew this was something that wasn't being addressed, but needed to be. And there are many people who are now, events of the last few years are thinking more about these issues and thinking more about, well, what do I have on my syllabus? What should I have? What's missing? But I'm really grateful for colleagues who have inspired me, for colleagues who have guided me, who have shared ideas, and who have kind of gently opened my eyes to my own biases, but also the biases of the field that I'm in that I didn't think about when I was an undergraduate. And honestly, I probably didn't really think about it a lot when I was in graduate school either. I was just sort of receiving the information, assuming that it was truth with a capital T. So that is it. Thank you.
Thank you. And you can see we're clapping even if you can't hear us, right? So we want to open up to a brief discussion now before we transition to our other speaker, and then we'll have more time at the end. And so you are free to unmute yourself and ask a question, make a comment. If two people speak at once, that's fine. We'll just work it out.
Rachel, I would love if you could share with me the hierarchy that you were talking about before I teach that in Psych 101.
Yeah, I can share the couple of readings that I found. And there's one that has a slide and it shows the model, and it's it's
awesome.
Quite striking. And
Yeah.
and I tried looking in every single book that I had, and I could not find any mention of the Blackfoot Nation other than a photograph in some archive on a university website that showed Maslow on a visit to a Blackfoot reservation.
Yeah, thank you.
Rachel, I have a question for you. So for someone who is listening to you here, who would like to start decolonizing their syllabi and does not know where to start, how would you recommend they start?
That is a great question. And I actually had a slide and now can't figure out where I clicked on something and I think I closed my PowerPoint, but I had a slide where I had some articles. So there was an article that Dr. Michelle Schlehofer shared with me that talks about decolonizing in the field of community psychology. And they're really talking about, it's like the three authors are from a specific graduate program. And so they're talking about things that they did in their graduate program. But there is also a special issue of the Journal of Social and Political Psychology, which is an open source journal that was started by someone who graduated from my PhD program the year before I started. And there's an entire special issue in that on decolonizing psychology. And there's actually a really great article in there about ability and disability that I had my Psychology of Prejudice students read this year. It was very theoretical, so it was a little bit heavy for them, but I'm happy to share links to those resources.
I'd love that. I'd love that.
And Professor Trineri put something in the chat as well about wanting the resources. So if you want to send them to me as well, I can send them out to this group.
Okay. Yeah, I can definitely do that.
Just to chime in, there's a fairly recent article in The Guardian that discusses this this task and this job of faculty as well. So if you probably just Googled The Guardian and decolonizing curriculum, you might find it.
And Martin put something in the chat as well about the Blackfoot beliefs.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Jean.
Okay, so Dr. Steele, I'm just curious on what got you interested in like the focus of other cultures involving like psychology.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I've always been interested in, doing cross-cultural travel for work and when I was an undergraduate, but it was really sort of after the racist events that occurred on campus, and we started having a lot of critical conversations about, what kind of environment are we creating for our students, that really got me to thinking, well, what am I doing right? And what am I maybe just doing that's what every professor has done, but it's not necessarily what's right. And so at that point in time, I was in the middle of my social psychology class, and we were on the unit about close relationships. And I thought, okay, what can I do here? And one of the things that I talked about is how in psychology research, most of the focus in close relationships, romantic relationships, is on heterosexual couples. Nowhere in my textbook did it even have the term LGBTQ+. And I showed them, I'm like, if you go to PsycInfo, which is the most commonly used search engine, and you type some term like close relationships, which is a very common term for that body of research, and then you add a second search term, LGBTQ, or any variant of that, you find like a 1%, like a 0.5%. It's like 1% of 1% of the full content of research that's out there. And so then I thought about it, and I'm like, basically everything that's in my textbook is only talking about heterosexual couples, and that's a problem. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm not fixing the problem right now. I'm just telling you that the problem's there, but I'm thinking about this now, and I'm going to try to fix it in the future. And so I think we're doing our students a disservice if we are sort of accepting what's always been done in our field as acceptable in the norm, and we're not thinking about questioning or supplementing, or, you know, one single textbook is not, you know, the authority on any topic. It's one person's, you know, list of what they picked and what they thought was important, but what they think is important maybe isn't actually what's the most important.
Thank you for that. I also wanted to say just really quick that I really appreciate the fact that you try to make a difference, as I'm a person of color as well. So with the whole situation happening at Salisbury, I was actually in Professor Trineri's class at the time, and you and her obviously don't really have to care about that per se, considering you're not a person of race, and it doesn't really have to affect you in a certain way. But the fact that you're understanding and trying to learn about what you can do to make a difference, it actually speaks a lot of volumes to your character, and I greatly appreciate that.
It's something all faculty members should do, and I realized that it was not what all faculty members did do, but I could visibly see on the faces of my students, in particular the Black students in my class, how impacted they were by those events and by things that are ongoing. I mean, now it's, you know, I don't see half of my students because they're on Zoom and their cameras off, but there are real world events that are happening all the time that are impacting our students and creating stress, and that stress is not proportional. Students of color, Black students, are experiencing much more of that than our white students. And if we're not thinking about that as educators and thinking about how we are bringing those people into our classroom, then we're kind of failing at our jobs.
I would just add the comment that while we as white people don't experience racism in the same way, it does diminish us all. Racism and racism as a pathology in our society has reached a point where our democracy is even threatened. If you consider the events of the last few months, challenging election results, how that notion may have been fueled by the sense that a white core can't win elections anymore, so they're maybe willing to toss aside our democratic institutions. Race and racism permeates our whole society, and again, I would just emphasize that it does diminish us all, even if those of us who have white or have white privilege don't experience it in nearly the same way on an individual basis. I just want to add another quick comment, and that is that I think it's really important to share with our students that science, while we think science is objective, that history especially can teach us that science is not, and that science can reflect the prejudices of our time, and history is really helpful in illuminating that. So when I teach about the Holocaust, we talk about eugenics, right, which was an accepted scientific field at a certain point in history, and was used to justify basically racial hierarchies and racism, and to cloak that in scientific credibility and to help reinforce those notions and get people into power and keep them in power.
Absolutely. So, Rachel, I think it's even more profound to hear how recently you began this work. You know, to me, it seems like a lifetime of work, and it's really encouraging to know that you ramped up that effort after the events on campus. So I think that's encouraging that we can all begin somewhere.
I mean, there were things that I was already aware of, like, you know, what are the images that are in a textbook, who's represented? If I choose photos for lecture slides, who and what is being represented. But I didn't think to question the basis of my discipline. I just kind of assumed, yeah, like that's just the way it is. That's just the truth of it. When in fact, it's not. That's the truth that got told.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and transition to Dr. Sharma's presentation, but again, we'll have plenty of time for open discussion. I think you'll see a lot of links between the two themes today. Dr. Andrew Sharma is a professor of communication. He has extensive academic, national, and international industry experience, having worked in the advertising and television industry in the US and abroad. His peer-reviewed writings and grant-funded projects reflect his research interest in the area of media effects. He is also a two-time Fulbright Scholar grantee to India. And today he's going to talk to us about his U.S. Department of State U.S.-India Educational Foundation grant to create civic engagement documentary films in the two countries. And Andrew, congratulations again on your 2020 Fulton Civic Engagement Award.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Egan, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, everybody, for coming to the presentation. Let me share my screen and so I can talk about my research work and how that translated into the project that I'm going to talk about today. So just give me 1 second. Can you all see the screen? Okay. So my project was, it's called Interactive Design Documentary, and I use this as a method for civic engagement. I think it goes without saying that most of us know what a documentary is, and most of us know what civic engagement is. But I'm just going to talk more about how I use these two in ways that can engage one another. The partners, this was grant-funded work. The grant came from the Department of State, and it was administered by the United States India Education Foundation. They are based in New Delhi, India. The partners in the project that took place are, of course, Salisbury University and Symbiosis Institute of Media and Communication. This is in a place called Pune in India. And if you kind of look at the map, it's about 4 hours away from the metro city of Mumbai, or Bombay, as it was known before. And I also had a consultant from the American Geosciences Institute, because we use a lot of geodata in a simulating thing. So this was a 2-year grant, and I just finished this in December. And we worked through that. So let me go through the objectives of the grant. The grant, I shortened it, called iDoc. Essentially, it's an interactive documentary filmmaking. And one of the main objectives was to develop a course in interactive documentary filmmaking, both at Salisbury University and also at the Symbiosis Institute of Media and Communication. The other objective I had was to encourage ordinary people, just people like you and me, people who are just doing their normal things, and to achieve a new role as participators in the actual project. If you look at traditional documentaries, the narrative is one way. The documentary is made by the producers, the production team, the people who want to tell the story or to explore. And then it's shown to people, and people, usually the audience, watches it, and sometimes that unfortunately becomes the end of that, and it doesn't go. What I want to do is actually engage the people, the audience, to participate in making of the documentary. And this is where the term interactive comes in. And using that, another main thrust of it was to promote civic engagement. So by making the ordinary people participate in the actual project, my aim was to also promote civic engagement in India and the US. So before I go much farther into the documentary, I just want to take a few minutes to kind of give you the different definitions of documentary versus interactive. The main one, if you look at the literature, would be it needs some physical action. And this can be any type. And by definition, it could be something like people using a computer screen, people tapping it on a tablet, going through different kinds of details, picking different narratives. Like if you're a gamer, you have those kinds of options. So do you want to go to, let's say you're playing a game where you need to go to a place A, place B, you can choose that by touching your screen, doing that. The problem of this interrupting option in the documentary is a little difficult because documentary is fact-based, and even though that recent term of alternative facts, we heard about it, it is not really an option because fact is fact. You can't just mess with those things. So there's no real way an audience can choose to go a different direction. Perhaps they can choose a different aspect of that documentary narrative. So for example, let's say we're talking about climate change. So you could have a documentary which explores, let's say, the rainfall happening in that land, or it could move into different agriculture, how it was affected. You know, so you could choose option A, option B. The way I chose it was this. We actually encourage people, the community members themselves, because they are the ones who are in the documentary. So as producers, we chose to ask them to participate. And this is not as much as how they shaped the creative functions of the film itself, because that probably is not a great idea, but more in terms of what, it's almost like a crowdfunding. So we're looking at a certain approach. For example, in the community, we're exploring some of the differences there or some of the problems. We talk to community members and they can supply us with a lot more detail. Okay. So for example, how did we do this? We told everyone in advance, no, by promoting the actual documentary itself and what we're doing heavily on social media. And the production itself, like we went to the community, and when we were doing the interviews, when we were doing the actual production, actual shooting, the production was actually being live on social media, using aspects like Facebook Live, Twitter. And in India, we use WhatsApp a lot, okay? And as the audience was looking at the production going on, they would send us and ask like, okay, maybe you could ask them this questions because I found no such and such, this was a problem, is that a problem there? And the audience was not local. This was about because the magic of internet, they're everywhere. And we got things like, okay, in the place where I live, now this is an issue. Do you think it'll be an issue there? So we could frame those questions. So it's almost like a live call-in show where we are adjusting the questions and the narrative based on if it merits it. And the other beautiful function was historical facts. I mean, these are now 20-something-year-old kids making the movie. So they are not, I mean, we do the research, but still there were people in the audience who actually know much older in the age range, and they had historical archive material, or at least they knew where to find it. So things like maps, okay, pictures, data that we could actually use, and we got to use all that. And this was what I termed it as interaction. So to reiterate, my interactive documentary, the definition was the interaction between the actual community itself, the audience looking at it, and the filmmakers who are actually making the film. So these are a couple of examples now. So we used Facebook heavily, of course, okay, and Twitter. So these are examples of a couple of things that we did. And there was a blog also we could follow through. And there were tons of followers out there. People who signed up, they followed, and they just, you know, kind of kept track of the day-to-day activity. Some of them actually came out to the shoots. Some of them followed us on just the social media. Just a bit about what actually was done in the grant. So as I said, this was a 2-year grant. So during year 1, now the faculty was, and I got to go back a little bit and talk about the recruitment of faculty in India. So I recruited about 5 faculty members from the SIMC in Pune, India, and they had never done a documentary activity like this before. I mean, they had courses where they did something. They had a lot of news-related courses, but not necessarily documentary. So a lot of them had they were stepping into something that they really didn't know. So I did train them. So in the summer, this was 2019, they actually came to SU, and I had a 3-week session where we trained them on pedagogical design, the actual making of the documentary, the technical aspects of it, and also a civic engagement curriculum. So Sandy Pope from PACE was the lead person in giving the faculty a taste of civic engagement, designing the curriculum, and those kinds of things. So after the training was done, they went back to India. They started recruiting the students there because this was a brand new course. So they recruited some students. And the second year, what we did was, after the course was created, the implementation of the course happened both at SU and also at SIMC. And in the spring semester, we did an assessment to see how this happened. So going on to assessments. So it was a completion of interactive documentary. So, and each place in India and SU, we had teams working on documentaries. And so it was created. And in SIMC, they created one documentary. And in SU, I had 2. And I also had them, after I had a survey, which is based on the civic engagement scale. I do it in the fall. So I had the students take the pretest, and then after the semester was done, where they engaged in making the documentary, I do a pretest. So ideally, what I hope for in theory was there would be a definite increase in their mean scores as measured from pre to the post. So I have a couple of examples of what the documentaries they produce. I'm not going to play the entire thing. One's about 15 minutes, one's about 27, maybe 30 minutes, but I'll give you a gist of just the opening scenes from each of them. So the Sioux Gone was the first one. It explores the effect of what urbanization does to rural India. So let me see if I can get to that.
मेरी पहचान बनती है उन रिश्तों से.
Can you see that video? Okay, so I have to share that screen. So just give me 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
How about now?
Yes, we see YouTube.
Is it full screen?
Yes.
Okay, so here are some few opening moments from the documentary made by the students in India.
मेरी पहचान बनती है उन रिश्तों से जो लोगों ने मुझसे जुड़े हैं. मेरे साथ है लोगों की भावनाएं. मैं जिंदा हूँ उनकी यादों में, मगर आजकल मैं समय के चक्रों में फंस गया हूँ. सब बदल रहा है. मैं कश्मकश में हूँ. कौन था, कौन हूँ, कौन बन जा रहा हूँ. एक तरफ वो है जो इस बदलाव को स्वीकार करके आगे बढ़ रहे हैं, और दूसरी तरफ वो जिन्हें इनकी परछाई का डर सताता है. पहले तो गाँव में तो ये है, स्कूल तो एक ही था सबके लिए. रास्ता ठीक नहीं था, मट्टी का रास्ता था. और फिर एक ही मास्टर, सब क्लास में एक ही मास्टर. वो कभी आता था, कभी नहीं आता था. और फिर हम खेत में जाते थे. हमारा खेत था, जानवर थे, और यहाँ पर कोई सुविधा नहीं थी. बावड़ी का पानी पीने का, बावड़ी से पानी लाने का.
जब आए थे तभी पूरा ऐसे पत्थर दिखता था. घर भी एकदम छोटी छोटी थी, और मट्टी, मतलब मिट्टी की थे, पत्थर के, मिट्टी के, और पेड़ बहुत थे. जहाँ भी जाओ पेड़ दिखे. जैसे आप
Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to stop it there, but I can send you a link if you want to watch the entire documentary. So in the opening shot you saw, and all those tall buildings, these are very recent. The thing was just farmlands. So the problem they're having is they're building all these things without regard to sanitation, water. It just, building shows up and people move in. And then they realize the issues like, what are these villagers supposed to do? So the documentary explores all that. So let me play the other clip from the documentary where the SU students explore something. Can you see that now?
Yes.
Okay.
When Madison was growing up, she was full of a lot of personality, always bubbly, always dancing, always loved music, loved to read books when she was little, just was full of life when she was younger. And I could see that one of her bedroom lights was on, and I could see that she was on the floor face down, like her bed was here on the wall, and then I could see her on the side, laying down on the floor, and I could tell she was face down. And at that point, I knew that she was gone. I could just had a sense, but I went over, and touched her, and could tell that, her body was cold. So she had been laying there pretty much all day.
"23, my husband died, and he had been an ex-heroin addict. So I figured it took his pain away, it would take mine away. So I ended up getting into heroin.
She
Again, for the sake of time, I just don't want to play the entire thing, but I can send you the link where I can do that. So let me go back to my PowerPoint screen that I've got to share. Okay, can you see that now?
Yes, we're good.
Perfect. So, okay. So that was the first assessment. So we took care of that. And then this was the iDoc survey where the pre-test and the post-test of the same survey was given to the students. The pre-test was given before they actually started filming the documentary. And after the 15 weeks, when the documentary is done, I also gave them the survey again. And I was glad when I did the analysis that it did positively affect their behavior. I mean, it went up significantly. I mean, given the sample size was low because we're dealing with a pilot project at this point, okay? But even with that, you could see the P levels are no 0 to 0.01. So when you combine all the survey items, the 14 scales, it went up. And civic attitudes, the items where they looked at just the attitudes, it went up too, and the behaviors. So interestingly, the questions where they asked, like, I care more about my community, I'll get more involved in my community, they all went up that way. So that was just great. And I also had asked them to give me a bit more qualitative in terms of data. So I had them keep journals and write their thoughts down and kind of debrief them after the whole thing was done. So these are a couple of sample codes I can share. I'll give you a minute to read it, because these are direct quotes, so I didn't paraphrase it. I mean, these are coming from 20-something kids. You know, I mean, we always say, yeah, young people, they don't, they don't really care. Actually, they do. Okay, and here's another one. I mean, how fantastic is that? I mean, this kid actually went out, did everything so she can be a part of the society, you know, helping people doing different things. All because, you know, in the whole course of making this, participating in making this documentary. Again, 20-something kid. So I was happy to note that this is what the grant was successful in whatever measures that I set out to do. And of course, I really love what the external grant evaluator said. I mean, I couldn't be any more happier. So, so with that, I end with some pictures of different things that I could show you. Okay, and essentially, what I want to do now is, with that pilot already done, I want to get the grant. I mean, as the evaluator said, you should continue this grant, and that's what my options are. So I'm writing more grants and see if they're successful in carrying out this project. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So again, I encourage you to unmute, and this is your time for questions and comments for Dr. Sharma.
I have a question of clarification, and this is probably failure on my part. You probably said this at the beginning, but of the people that you surveyed, were those the people the students who worked on making the documentary?
Right, the students in the class.
Okay. That's what I was like, who's the participant sample? Okay, thank you.
The hypothesis was the people who participate in that experience, they will gain knowledge about the community and the measurement of the community behavior and the other civic skills will actually go up. And that was the pre and the post test.
Okay. So those were all SU students?
We had two teams, one in SU and one in India in SMC Pune.
Okay.
So it was a simultaneous process where we were doing the same things at both ends.
And did you notice a difference in the scores of the students from Salisbury?
I did test it. It was not significant. There were some, the level was up and down, but not significant. It was the same. Which kind of tells me, young kids are kids everywhere, which is great.
On that note, I was wondering, you mentioned that this was live streaming on social media. So first thing that came into my mind was, were people actually behaving genuinely, or do you think they were on stage?
The live streaming was the actual interview, the production process, not the people who are actually in front. The camera is already there. So I do get your point, but since the camera is already there, it is already the people are not behaving the way they're supposed to.
Yeah.
But we understand that anyway, because documentary, unlike narrative, the fictional narratives, we set the stage. So before we actually entered with the camera, we spent about a month just talking to them, making them very comfortable, actually kind of living with them. And this we tend to do in most documentaries because we just can't put a camera right in their face and start saying, because their behavior will change. So I need to earn their trust. So that has already been done way before we bring the cameras and my crew into the place of shooting.
Excellent.
Good question. Yeah, I like that.
Oh, thank you. Good work.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Other questions specific to Dr. Sharma's work?
curious if you see differences between this type of a student project, which definitely involves a lot more intimate. I mean, maybe all of your courses involve students being really intimately involved in the work. I'm not sure. But if you kind of notice differences across like doing this type of a project where it just seems very personal for the students who are a part of it, versus other courses, you know, where maybe they don't have kind of an interactive component. I'm just thinking about like the value of that kind of learning.
I can't really comment to this because all the courses I teach are media involved. I'm a filmmaker, so I teach filmmaking courses. The only one course that is not filmmaking is advertising, but even in that course, there's a heavy community involvement because they make an advertising campaign for a community organization. So in fact, if I gave that survey to that class too, which I should do, okay, I can almost guarantee you the scores will be about the same because the people I choose, the organizations, they're all nonprofit. I don't choose any for-profit organization for advertising classes. So the civic engagement is kind of a theme in almost every one of my classes I teach. And I've been doing this from, I don't know, the moment I started teaching, because even before I taught, in my professional work, I engaged with my community all the time. So I modeled all my classes, my teaching method after my industry. So it's never just do this and go home. It's more like do this for the community and then go home. It was always that way.
I'd just sort of jump in with a comment maybe about some of the synergies we could talk about with these two presentations juxtaposed. And I know Rachel just completed a course again with Michelle, working with a group of students in India. So groups of students in India and the United States looking at a shared text on Caste, Isabel Wilkerson's book Caste. But thinking about the filmmaking process and how students learning media production are certainly learning those tools, but at the same time, they're learning about a subject. And I think most of us would agree that we really started learning our areas when we had to teach it, right? That there's a big sort of, wow, this is very different from reading books and thinking about questions and responding to them on exams. When you're accountable for sharing that information with another group of people, you really learn it in a totally different way. And there are probably ways that we can leverage that. I think in filmmaking, you're now communicating information to others. And I think there's that same sense of accountability. So just thinking about the power of that and the potential of that for engaging diverse groups of students and exploring really important topics and getting students to talk with one another.
This is sort of related to that. I was wondering how you arrived at the topics, if the students chose the topics, and just what topics you would like to explore in the future.
Is this for me, right?
Yes, yeah. And I meant the topics of the documentaries. I don't know if I made that clear, but yeah.
The students chose the topic. I pretty much give them open control on what they want to do. I do sometimes, depending upon their maturity, sometimes I get things like, oh, I want to make a documentary about the parking problems in the SU. Those things I don't entertain. But besides that, I really don't, okay, I guide them. I don't really tell them what to do, okay? So they choose it.
Since you mentioned that you would share the links, that would be much appreciated. So if you'll pass them along, I'll also share them out. I would like to see.
Okay. Should I put that in the chat or can I give it to you later?
Sure, you can. I've been copying all the links in the chat to share back out too. Sure. And I just put 2 others.
I know nothing about filmmaking, but I'm curious, were these semester-long courses? Like they did it from start to finish. They made a documentary in that amount of time?
Yeah, it's a semester long, 15 week. It's pretty short, and it is pretty intensive. And to their credit, they really came out and did things. I mean, the Indian one is about 15 minutes. It was longer, but no, students, they're learning. The SU one, it's about 30 minutes. And it's quite a large piece for 15 weeks.
I was also struck by that, Rachel, just how the quality of this in a single semester. So I guess I'm wondering, are there like prerequisites to this course where they're coming in with some knowledge already about filmmaking?
Yes and no. There is, for the SU side, there is a prerequisite. Okay, but what I've found with these courses, it depends on when they have taken that. So I usually, what I do is I refresh their memories, bring them up to speed. And they work in teams. It's not just one person. So the documentaries you saw, it had 6 people in it, actually 5. So one's a producer, one's a director, one is a writer, one's an editor, one's a camera, one's a sound. So they all have individual roles they have to play, but they work together to see how that goes. And in the Indian side, I think they had, it was a class of 15, and since they were doing this for the first time, they put all 15 in the same group, and that was a little, I mean, it's a whole bunch of things I learned about Indian culture and how that works, and so.
I guess I'm also wondering how COVID might have affected your filmmaking.
It did. Fortunately, we did all the production, the shooting in the fall semester before COVID really hit. So we had all our footage and everything, though, so we could actually just sit down and edit and not go into the community, because COVID came around in March. So we were done with our filming in January. So that was a godsend. In one way, it saved it otherwise. Okay. And even though there's a lot of things that the grant work needed that I could not do. For example, I was going, we were supposed to travel back there again, show it to the community, because that was another part of interactivity. So instead of just putting this on YouTube, we were actually going to screen this in the community with the people who were in that documentary. None of that we could do, thanks to COVID.
Do you think that might be a goal in the future?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Do you think that might be a goal in the future, you know, when conditions allow, to go back to the places and the people who were a part of it and show them the documentary in person?
I mean, when I continue this grant, that would be in the grant itself, so we can do all that. And hopefully by that time, the grant is funded. No, if I get funded, COVID would be a bit of history. So I'm hoping for that.
I'll just comment that I've co-taught with Dr. Sharma history and film, a class in which students make documentary films. But I think psychology this would be a great collaboration potentially in terms of the subject area, learning the medium, and exploring issues across cultures.
I'm absolutely open to that idea.
Just saying.
And Rachel, would you say a word then about the CAST course you just completed with Michelle Schleihofer between the US and India? Because that seems to welcome some opportunities to collaborate.
Sure. Yeah, I think we're going to talk about that more when we meet with our collaborators in India on Thursday. But Martin was the source of the collaboration. I just got the email saying, you know, hey, does anybody want to teach this class? And I thought, you know, wow, this would be really cool. But it was a winter course. It was 1 credit, and we had students from SU and students from Pandit Deendayal Petroleum University in India. And we had 2 live events because the time difference is so large that the only time that really was logical was early morning our time, which was kind of eking into their evening time. So we had two events. One was, mostly dignitaries of both universities kind of talking about the collaboration and the partnership. And the second was experts in different fields, different disciplines from each university talking about themes in the book. So the students read the book, Cast, The Origins of Our Discontent, which is largely about race, racial segregation, racism in the United States. And I kind of think of it as like the history that we didn't learn when we learned US history, all the kind of details that, make people feel bad. And that's why they're not in textbooks. But it did a lot of comparison between the United States and India and Nazi Germany. And so we engaged our students in online discussions about themes from the books, and mostly they read the book, but we had supplemental readings for them as well, to go with each of the sections of Wilkerson's book. And I was incredibly impressed with our student engagement and with the depth of the kinds of things they were talking about. I'm sure I was missing stuff because I don't understand the Indian context nearly as well. So I'm sure there was another layer of meaning that maybe I wasn't getting, that if I knew more, I would be able to read more into it. But it was a really good experience. And both Michelle and I, feel like we would love to teach this as a course again. Whether that's, again, as a one semester, even, extending it to like a full semester long course.
And I think I saw on one of the sites for the book that a documentary is being made, but there was some mention of a film. That could be particularly interesting. Thank you, Andrew. I am copying these. Any other thoughts or inspiration as you're processing everything?
I appreciate these colloquia talks because I have gotten to hear about interesting things that people in Fulton do that I never would have known about. And I especially appreciate that you lumped people together this semester, because I feel like I don't oftentimes do enough to kind of learn what other people at SU are doing, especially across departments. So I really appreciate being able to hear Dr. Sharma's talk today and kind of think more about the documentary filmmaking process.
Well, thank you for saying that. It makes sense. We're so busy doing our own work. It's very hard to stop and hear about each other's, but it's so fascinating when we get the chance to. So thank you. And thanks to all these great colleagues who came. We also have staff on the call still, and I know we had students, they may have disappeared, but it was very encouraging to have this great mix. So again, I've saved all the links from the chat. If you want to share additional things, I'm happy to send it out to the group. Thank you so much, Andrew and Rachel. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for organizing.
Good. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.